30 seconds? All right, thank you, Facebook family and friends, for joining. We're starting our radio show, Armed Radio, in about 20 seconds, and I've got a special guest, David Rodriguez, joining us. We're going to get him tuned in here real quick. David, do you have an invite? Can you hear me, David? Okay, do you have an invite? Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our amazing show, Armed Radio. I am your host, Professor Jamie Lynn, and I've got a really fabulous guest for you tonight, David Rodriguez. He is a highly credentialed educator. He has his own show, and really excited to have him on. Our topic, let's talk about sex, of course, is should we have sex education in public schools? Obviously, we do have sex education in public schools, and we want to know your thoughts on this. You know, should we continue to have that? If we do have that, what should it look like? How do we address this? What's going on with our public schools? How do we differentiate between sex education compared to love and intimacy? So really excited to have this radio show tonight, and I know we have lots of callers that call in to talk with us, so please feel free to do that. I, as usual, forget the phone number offhand, but I'm just going to tell a story about my experience in sex ed when I was in high school back in the 90s. I graduated in 1995, so for all of our amazing fans, Generation X, that's us, and then we've got the younger Generation Y, the millennials. But my story in special circumstances of sex ed, I remember 9th grade, walking into class, and we all thought it was a joke, right? You know, that this is funny, we have to take sex education, what are we going to learn? In the 90s, I would say maybe about 10% of my friends were already having sex. They were, you know, having intercourse and being intimate by the age of 14, 15 years old. And, you know, having already experienced that, a lot of us look to them. And going into class, I'm adding David. Class, we're all sitting around and we're laughing and we're excited, and the teacher says to us, you all have to pick a descriptive name that starts with the first letter of yours. And so, you know, you've got A and B, and I'm a J, and I'm like, well, what do I come up with? So I came up with Juicy Jamie. And I don't know why I thought that was funny, Juicy Jamie. Not like juicy, like what happens when you have sex. But I thought juicy was like descriptive of, you know, something that's voluptuous and ripe and capable of being excitatory when you think of something being juicy. So that was my story on sex ed. And then obviously being shown pictures of pictures of genitalia and talking about sexual diseases and pregnancy and things like that. So we're going to get right into it. My guest has joined us. Thank you so much, David Rodriguez. It's nice to have you. We got this all figured out.
I mean, we did it. So happy to be here and have an awesome conversation about a very important topic wrapped in other layers of important topics, and hopefully give some value and some ideas and something to help out the audience and have some fun too. So great to be here.
Absolutely. So, you know, this is my radio show, Armed Radio. I'm so happy for them. And Professor Jamie Lynn is my brand. People know I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, behavior analyst. I taught in the inner city schools of East Los Angeles and Watts for some years. I moved on to administration, and then I founded my own private public partnership, so charter schools and special education programs, as well as I opened mental health clinics. So in my day, I've had at the top of my game 312 staff of teachers, therapists, attorneys, all providing services for the special needs population, from the mild end to the severe end. And I am an avid advocate for, transparency, accountability. And in my day, that's kind of my history. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, my background is in business, and I was born and raised in California and had a bunch of different sales jobs as a young person. I decided I wanted to make a lot of money and be in business. So I sold my first business at age 26, kind of jaded with just making money, and I decided to move overseas. I taught English in Korea for about a year, did some biotech work there. And I was asking, how can I make a difference with this life, right? Because money's nice and it's necessary, but really, what are we doing here? So, long story shortened, thought that the future of the world is our kids, and I was curious why I didn't learn these certain things I learned, not in business school, although I have a business degree, certain things which would help me be successful in life. Why haven't I heard about these things? Looked into it, found a gentleman by the name of John Taylor Gatto, and started my own event, Education Options Expo, where I promote respectful models of learning, as opposed to the compulsory model, which is egregious, immoral, and just damaging kids daily. So that turned into a YouTube channel, Education Options TV, and now I'm building my own school, Valor Academy, which focuses on apprenticeships, actually helping young people get in the world and get some hands-on, get some mentorships, actually get a real education, because I don't think what's happening in the school system is anything close to it. And that's what John Gatto distinguishes, the difference between an education and a schooling. And so I also do some homeschool coaching for parents as a free Facebook homeschool leader there. But yeah, just helping parents, helping young people find out how to learn, how to create a life that they love. And I think education is the way to do it. And with technology like this, it's such a great opportunity to do so.
Yeah. So, the topic sex education is, ultimately what we'll talk about. But I think for our listeners, it's important to talk about education at large to maybe set the stage, because, here we are, the United States, you taught in Korea, you said presumably South Korea, and you weren't up there in North. And, I've traveled with USC in my doctorate program. My doctorate is global executive policy. So I've been to Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and looking at the education policies and procedures. In the United States, our public schools are in array. So the curriculum is problematic. Obviously, we're dealing with these shooting issues. I do want to talk to you about that. But the topic sex education is so here's this big issue on sex education. You and I looked at that article at, ironically, San Diego School District, and I do a lot of work with UC San Diego and Cal State San Diego, and looking at sex ed in schools. And it was such a great article, because that woman, she spoke up and just talked about how she pulled her actual child out over the sex education curriculum and is now homeschooling and looking at how, I guess I would call it awakening, right? So tell us a little bit, for our listeners, your perspective on the current state of education in our country and in the United States.
It's a great question, and I think the most important word is to understand education reform is a term that's been thrown around for the last 60 years. So I don't really have hope in political reform generally, just because there's so much money involved in the system. And just to give your listeners and viewers an idea, the K-12 school system nationwide, the budget's over $600 billion. And to contrast that, the National Football League, the number one sports league in the country, generates over $13 billion per year.
Okay, so hold on. I want to grasp that, because it's so important. So our education, this is our general ed. This isn't including our special education, because our special education budget is $262 billion. So our general ed budget is $600 billion. Okay. And you said the football league is what?
13.
Okay. So that puts it into perspective.
40 times larger. So when people talk about reform, I believe there's a lot of good people out there wanting to do good work. But what happens when you incentivize people with financial rewards? Also, the teachers union is the largest union in the country. So there's a lot of political power. So in essence, the school systems have been the school system has been downgrading for years. And as John Taylor Gatto mentions, it's an intentional dumbing down. So, of course, there's Common Core curriculum. There's No Child Left Behind. There's uh, uh, what is the off on the top? I mean, there's all these different curriculums the last few decades. It's been like more and
Standardized
more and more
testing paradigms. Yeah.
testing. Exactly. And so they throw money at it. They throw, all this, influence and political power around. Of course, the kids. I mean, I said it in my introduction, like the kids, but like when you really want to help and all you know is a compulsory school system, then that's what you're going to support. And so what I've discovered is that the voluntary learning approaches and models have been around for over 90 years that I've seen. I mean, you exclude homeschooling, has been around for thousands of years, proven successes, not under coercive attendance policies, coercive curriculum. And we can talk about some of the solutions too. I hope we can maybe get in some time. But the essence is that it's a huge business and it's political and they have agendas and it's I don't think it's going to change from the inside. There are good teachers. There are some like charter schools and stuff that can work. You started something like yourself, you're working within the system, and this is a way to do it. There is ways to impact hundreds and thousands of kids. And so the state was that they just don't have an opportunity to pursue what they're interested in. So let's fast forward your child when they graduate high school at age 17 or 18, and you say, Johnny, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And they look at you like, a deer in headlights because that's not even on their mind for the last 12 years. So I believe if we can get that question asked to them around age 12 or 13, at least they can begin thinking about it. And if the parents understand really what the support around it, then they can actually allow them to pursue that education. So the compulsory, the attendance, the curriculum, I find that problematic. But there's lots of people that care and lots of people listening who want to change. And I think getting them out of the system or providing some voluntary solutions rather than the coercive means is one positive step.
Nice. So I have a guest watching who's, curious and saying, I thought this topic was about sex education in schools. And it is. And we're going to obviously get to the sex education in schools. But for his, comment and question is people need to understand what is curriculum, what is the fact that we put sex education into schools. So we're explaining for our listeners again, how did this come to be? How did schools become in charge of our children and in the area of sex, especially? So I want to piggyback up on what you talked about just for the educational knowledge of our listeners that are into learning something more beyond just sex. But in looking at, I always historically, when I speak about public schools, I go back to the Constitution, the founding of America, which is tied into this gun control issue. When we look at the Constitution of America and we look at what our country says, our foundation of what we're supposed to abide by, it's heavily embedded in schooling. And then this issue of gun control and whatnot in the Constitution. But schools were never meant to be privatized. So people need to understand, whoever's listening and watching, this is important whether you have children or you don't have children, because it's your tax dollars. So that $600 billion budget is coming from your hard-earned money. Even if you're a 16-year-old kid working at, Chick-fil-A, or you're a 30-year-old bachelor, making a ton of money, it's important for everybody to understand what education was and how it came to be. And our founding fathers in the Constitution really were adamant that schools should never be, publicly ran. It should be privatized. It should have a charter component. It should have the same foundations incorporated of capitalism and a democracy, which is free enterprise, competition. So you're competitive and you're creating curriculum and a school setting, so you can, a parent choice that you can go and build an education and a mindset that's stronger and competitive, tying into this agenda of dumbing down. And that this public school notion of taking our tax dollars, which I think I'm not an expert at it, but primarily comes from homeowners. A lot of the homeowner tax goes into the public schools, but of course there's other avenues of taxation and fundraising and policies that give back into our public funds. But this is who's educating our children. We're supposed to be sending our children to these schools. Everybody has a financial interest in this, whether you're a parent or not. And we're having these issues such as sex issues, the proliferation of sex, promiscuity, morality, demorality, and obviously, like my kids talk about it, they're scared to go to school. I talked about on one of my shows like 3 weeks ago. In the seventh grade locker room, a girl was caught giving oral sex to a boy. We were out to dinner at sushi last week, and my daughter showed me videos of girls in fistfights punching each other and teachers trying to break them up. I mean, this is what's happening in our public school settings, not just now, but this has been ongoing for decades. And I kind of went on a tangent about the Constitution and the history, but hopefully that makes sense to people.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. I think you asked about the state of the current system. In order to understand the state, we got to understand a little bit about the history. This system was imported from Germany, from Prussia, Germany. So the reason that they brought it over was specifically to have obedient soldiers and obedient citizens, so benefiting the state and benefiting giant corporations. And what I would refer your listeners to is Alexander Inglis wrote a book called Principles of Secondary Education in the 1920s, and he actually listed the 6 functions of secondary education, and that's high school, right, from ninth to 12th grade. And it was specifically mentioned the first one to create a fixed habit of reaction, not innovation, not creative expression, self-expression, thinking, philosophy, but actually to react. So that's where the compulsory nature came in. The first state to pass compulsory attendance laws was in Massachusetts in 1852 by Horace Mann. That's why you see his name everywhere, because he's the one who brought over this great system. However, there were parents who resisted because they had come over from Europe and they saw what happens when tyrants get in control of the kids. And so controlling the mind of the youth controls the future adult. So you get them respecting your authority or your emblem or your title or whatever it is. The Prussians actually said in the 1800s by Johann Fichte, that last name is spelled Fichte, in I believe the eighth address to the German nation, in summary, we have to have a school so that the students can't even imagine doing something other than which they have been approved to do, which they have permission, which their teachers would be allowing them to do. So that's where the state now, so now we're talking about sex education, right? That was a quick history, but sex education, what can parents do, right? So they're in the compulsory attendance system. What are the ramifications that parents can do? There's even, this goes back to the 90s, teaching about anal sex, teaching 12-year-old boys and girls that anal sex is better because you can't get pregnant. So you should know about it. And here's a lube, and here's a dildo, and here's all these other things. I don't want to get too explicit. You can search John Taylor Gatto on that, but he's listed it in some of the first volume of the republication of the Underground History of American Education, and also the open letter on his blog to Donald Trump. He wrote an open letter mentioning all these things, and you're like, you don't even want to read it. Like, it's so X-rated, and it's like, oh my gosh, like these strangers who are generally good people, right? My mother was a teacher for 20 years, and I have close family members who I love dearly also, who are teachers and principals in the system. So although I'm not throwing the entire system under the bus, because there's good people in there, and there's also, bad teachers, but there are good people that want to help. But I think the high level question that maybe your listeners would benefit from is asking, what is an education? Truly, this is not rhetorical. Really, what is it? Because you go back to the Latin root of it, educo means to draw from within, to pull out. So I believe, like Buckminster Fuller, I saw that quote on the comments about Buckminster Fuller, you never change reality by fighting against it. You have to create a new model that makes the old model obsolete. But he also said every child is a born genius. The challenge is they get de-geniused, trying to please their teachers and please their parents. Pablo Picasso said every child is a born artist. So there's all these great minds, and that's just a few of them, but the kids got it. The kids have the power, they have the gift, and it's drilled out of them by making them dislike learning, because they assume learning is the memorization and the regurgitation of these facts, but that is not what an education is, in my opinion. So I think that's a good place for parents to consider, like, What is an education? Is it a 4.0? Because if my kid gets a 4.0, that means they're smart.
So I have
Well,
there's an input here, a comment from an amazing man I know, Gary Brown. He's a lawyer, and he's asking, do you think it would be wise to restart parent-teacher groups so that open discussions can occur about values?
I think open discussion is such a great idea. And if you've seen some of the documentaries like Waiting for Superman and trying to change the system, the unions come and dominate the meetings because their golden goose is getting threatened. But maybe there's some informal way to do it because conversation is the future of making the change. I mean, however, when you come down to a compulsory system, I would never force any of your listeners to be in a building against their will, right? And that's what the mandatory attendance policy is about. Because if your child has 3 unexcused absences, at least in California, they can fine the parent up to $2,000 and put them in jail for a year. That's the California Education Code. So, with that kind of force and threat of force behind the attendance, it's like, well, what can they do? They can go out and picket, and they can, raise signs and do that, which, allows people to think about it and bring attention to it. But actual change, I think it's going to come by removing kids from the system or doing some kind of independent study outside of it, doing some private school where the curriculum is not determined by the people in Sacramento or the people in Washington, D.C. And that's what this new Common Core curriculum is about, is that there's no longer state control. If you accept the money, which this curriculum was largely funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you take that money, now you have no control no control to edit that curriculum. So this sex education, they might make some small changes, but in terms of like the general agenda, like this ship, in my view, and what it looks like is that it's sailed. And so what to do for parents is to definitely have a conversation about sex with your kids. I mean, we can get back to that topic if you want, but I don't think strangers would be the best people to teach about reproduction, intimacy, deep soul connection, the things what this life is about. Have some stranger who I don't even know and who I won't even see again. I came from a kind of small town, so I might hear about these teachers, but from an urban city, like where the shooting was in Florida, that was 3,200 students in a building. So it's like a mini city in these places. So have some intimate conversation about your body changing, things growing and hair and all these like menstrual cycle. I mean, there's some deep stuff that wow, we need some care and compassion and some wisdom. And I think voluntary attendance and solutions is probably the way out. But conversation, I think, is a great idea, definitely.
Well, and I think this goes back to the question. It's a bigger question in the education overall of our children when it comes to things like sex and intimacy and even friendship and social functioning at large. Is parents that are working a lot. We're all kind of working now. We're growing up. Our children are growing up with two parents working or single parents, so they're working a lot. And they don't know what to do. There's an element of helplessness. And so we've got social media. The children are on their social media, so they're learning about sex. They're learning about intimacy. They're learning about how to behave ethically, morally, and with values in the world from Facebook, from Instagram, from YouTube, from non sources of merit, if you will. We have a decline in religion. We have a system where we're sending our children to to public schools with compulsory education in hopes that they're getting the content that they're supposed to get. But it really comes down to learning how to learn, using our mind, being able to actually engage in reciprocal conversations for the student, but also for the parents and for everybody within the community. And I think that's the big issue when it comes to sex ed, is these children, by the time they're getting into sex ed, this goes back to what I was talking about within my own personal life and watching as a marriage and family therapist, my patients and as a principal to teach. These kids by 14, they know all about that stuff. They know what the things that you mentioned before, anal sex and and sex toys and threesomes and orgies and swingers parties. By the time our kids are 14, they are very well versed in all of these issues from platforms other than education system. So I think if we're going to be looking for solutions, it's working within essentially the system we have. If you're not a parent that can homeschool, if you are, it's working in the system, creating the ability to be able to send our kids to private schools that are affordable. Charter schools are, relatively new. That was, I believe, passed in 1995 or 1996 in California. And being able to have a competitive nature and curriculum accessible in niche markets, if you will, or specialized area, whether it's vocational or if it's STEM or if it's arts, creative thinking. But I think we have to look for solutions with what already is, as opposed to, like, I don't know about you, but I remember my grandmother, I would listen to her when I was younger. I was like, she's always saying that the world is so much worse off. And oh God, here she was again. And I'm like, wait, I started doing that at 35 and she was like 60. So how do we find the solution? I mean, what do you suggest for solutions?
I think the solution to everything is voluntary relationships. I would never force you or anybody on this planet to do anything against their will. So, in my research and my expos and my TV on Education Options TV, I found some options. There's a movie for free. You can see it on YouTube called Summerhill 2008. It's about a school that's been around for over 90 years. What is the school? It's a K-12 boarding school, has over 100 students or so, and there's no compulsion at the school. Here's what they do. You show up, they're like, hey, welcome to Summerhill. Here's the classes that you can take if you want, and they have some really cool classes. And if you don't want to take any of these classes, there's a bike ramp out front. There's musical instruments in the barn in the back. There's a tree house over there, and there's 10 acres of ground around us. Be a kid and go play and go find out what you want to learn and what you want to study. So it's a great movie. I highly recommend it. And so in that movie, you see what happens. This is a real school. It's been around for a long time. And around, I would say, age 9, 10, 11, right there, when the identity, the personality of the child becomes like a young adult, they actually want to learn. And in that context, they become super learners. They become super geniuses because now it's like, how does this thing work? The great story about Einstein, he was 4 years old and he wasn't talking at age 4.
Right.
And so the experts around him said, oh, he's never going to be independent. You have kind of a dumb, special ed son. What happened is somebody gave him a gift at Christmas, and it was a magnet. And those little metal shrapnels that you build like little mountains on the little magnets, and you're
Yeah.
like, wow, that's cool. He was so fascinated by how did those metal things become magnetized? What's going on here? So, anyways, that inspired him, and he started to study math and physics and stuff like that. So that was one of the sparks in his biography that allowed him to become one of the greatest scientists of the past century. So this movie details what happens at this school, and these people go off to have a great life, engineers and doctors and nurses and musicians and artists, and you're like, how come nobody told me about this school? Well, there's also another school system called Sudbury. They're in the U.S. Summerhill's in the U.K. Sudbury's in the U.S. I think got about 50 or 60 schools now. That's a great model. There's something called Agile Learning Centers. They've been around for a little while too. Homeschooling and the essence of it, unschooling, apprenticeships. The the essence, I believe, for the solution is helping young people find their love of learning. And you said it great earlier, learning to learn. And as Gatto indicates, helping students learn to teach themselves. So when there's no expert and there's no leader, what am I going to do? Right? I'm by myself. Life is a mystery. Life is a gift. Life is phenomenal. So I need to be comfortable with myself. Self-knowledge is the key to maybe all knowledge, maybe all wisdom, being with ourselves. And schools are so busy with bells, tests, all these things, they can never just relax, and be a human. Like, you remember summertime? Well, for me, I love summer. And then when I saw, like, because I was playing football, so like I saw football practice coming, I knew school was coming, I was like dreading it, dreading it. And I felt that, in my heart and soul. And so many students, I think, feel that, where you're forcing me to be here, And what Agile Learning Centers have is like or I should say, North Star Self-Directed Learning Team Centers is like a building with voluntary classes. And so these things exist. That one's been around for 20 years. And I was so impressed that these types of models exist. And some of them are thriving, some of them are struggling, right? Because you're dealing with the cost of rent. Students come in, students graduate. You got to have some constant there. Maybe they're not the best at marketing and need some assistance, some entrepreneurship there. But there are some great things happening, and I am very hopeful because the internet's a game changer. Here we are having an international television show and talking to hundreds of thousands and millions of people around the planet about solutions to these education options. And this couldn't exist 10 years ago. So I think there's a lot of positive solutions out there. And the essence for me is that it would be voluntary. It would actually allow us to be humans and to say, what are you interested in? And there's another curriculum, like creating a curriculum as a curriculum. Curriculum comes from the Latin root, a path, like a course that you run. So just like you have a unique thumbprint, you have unique DNA. How can some strangers determine what the curriculum's going to be? They don't even know me. The person who knows me my best is my mom and my dad, my brother, my family. So if somebody's talented in music, hey, they can kind of guide them over here, or if they're talented in math and these kind of things, they can guide them over here. And the greatest thing is at the university level, as you may know, they love these young people who are on fire, who are actually found like, I want to be a top scientist, but they're 14 years old. Come on into Berkeley, come on into USC or MIT or Stanford. They love that because when that person graduates at age 17 and they're starting their own company at age 19 or 22, cover of Forbes, cover of Fortune, whatever it is. Oh, where did you go to school? Harvard. Oh, Stanford. Oh, MIT. So it's a business, right? So it's a branding move, and it's phenomenal. I believe the kids are actually brilliant. Every single person is brilliant, perhaps genius, and it's a matter of helping them discover that for themselves. Not somebody telling it to them like, you're so genius, you're so smart, but they got to realize that for themselves and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm a super person, I'm a superwoman, I'm a superman. That is where I think the inspiration can come from. And then they go off and create solutions and change the world. Elon Musk didn't really like school. Other people dropping out, and pursuing it. Richard Branson is another dropout. Thomas Edison, these guys are dropouts. And another resource your listeners and viewers might enjoy is the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, who just begged to drop out of school. And he did. He was working a full-time job at age 12 and putting himself through a rigorous self-education, learning about virtues, learning about morality. And it's like, how come I didn't learn about this stuff in school? I was there like reading these boring books and I'm like, oh, I hate reading. I didn't hate reading. I just hated somebody telling me this is what you have to read because there's going to be a test on Friday.
Right. What to read or what to do or how to do it. There isn't a freedom, an exploration. I mean, you have like Waldorf and you've got Montessori and different, approaches to learning. But I know in our day and age too, the kids are now on these tablets. I mean, that's an evolution in and of itself. Is in the younger generation, we played with animals. We liked, skateboarding, riding bikes, doing sports, being interactive with our environment. And our brains have changed so rapidly in the technology era that a lot of the kids are going to school and they're just not interested in many of the things that are being forced to study.
That's exactly what it is. They associate learning with you telling me what to do when the future, and all those schools share one principle. It's called self-directed learning. And this is something that Peter Gray talks a lot about. And I really appreciate his work as well. He's done some great research into self-directed learning. And all that is that you can lead yourself. You don't need somebody else to tell you what to do. And one of the really interesting things I learned in college was how awesome the library is in here. I came from a small town. The library was like dinky, but it was, interesting and cool. But the library down here in San Jose, the Martin Luther King Library, this thing, I'm not kidding, this is probably 8 or 9 floors, and there's just heaps of books everywhere, and you can really get lost in there and just read all day and just find something that's, piquing your interest that day, or there's a hot topic for the day. And one of the distinctions of a library and a compulsory attendance school is that in a library, people are respected, and people actually, you'll be in there studying or talking, and somebody's, shh, it's, oh, sorry. I want to respect you. You're respecting the quiet in here. We respect the quiet there. Okay, sorry about that. In school, it's just mayhem. There's bells, there's things happening, there's sports events, there's clubs, all these incredible things happening. And there's not that time that we mentioned earlier to just kind of be with yourself and feel what you're supposed to feel. Because it seems to me that, the creator of the humans,
Hmm.
God or whatever people believe, evolution or whatever it is, whoever built this thing gave us indicators as feelings and things which should help us, direct. Oh, I'm feeling scared here. Why? Why am I feeling scared? Oh, there's a bear right there, or I'm in a dark alley by myself. But if I'm around like-minded people or people who are nice and friendly and then I'm feeling scared, what is it? And it's the actual system of testing, grading. Because remember, most important to success, according to many experts, is self-esteem. Self-worth. How do you feel about yourself? How does your young 10-year-old, they're 13, they're 16, they're worried about fitting in, and going back to the technology part of it, all these beautiful people on social media and all these beautiful pictures, they think that's real life, right? They see posts, they see images, and they're like, oh, that's what their life is. But then you see them behind the curtain, and they're like, oh man, I'm having this trouble in my life. I'm having this problem. I'm sad about that. Well, you're wealthy and famous. Doesn't that mean happiness? No. Oh, so what's happiness, right? I mean, really taking the high level, what's the purpose of education? Okay, we got to define what education is, and you got to find out what is that purpose. And I think it's to create a good life. I think it's to build and design a life that you love and something you can enjoy and maybe share with another person or people, build a family and create a legacy and make the world a better place. I mean, that's one idea. I mean, what's your listeners think? I mean, this is, I think, a really substantial conversation to have and to think about and have someone tell you this is what it is. I don't know. This is your life. This is a great thing that we're doing here in living and breathing and sharing and going on to the next phase of life is like this is should be exciting and an adventure if you want or something that we feel deeply and self-directed learning allows that where you have let's say you have a week of time. What are you going to do? Oh, I want to go camping. Okay, I want to go do these fun things versus school conservatively is 9 months, 10 months of mandatory attendance for 12 years from age 6 to age 18, the most formative years of your personality. I mean, of course, the first 6 years, there's a lot of influence there too. But when the kindergartner, the first grader, is taken to school on the first day, I think I might have done it too. I think they cry. I think I might have cried and be like, what are we doing here? And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
you got to do that.
All my
Well,
kids cried.
right? So it's like, okay, this is just a, rite of passage. No. If you go back and study rite of passages, this is another interesting thing. When you're 12 or 13 years old, they send these teenagers on some vision quests,
Hmm.
going back to like some of the
Native
native
Americans.
peoples here in this land.
Hmm.
And they send them on a journey and they give them enough food for a night and they say, come back in 3 nights. And they go off and they go do something, they go kill something or they go travel or grab and obtain something and come back. And when they left as boys, but then they come back as men, or they left as girls and they come back as women because they were by themselves with risk around them, food, water, shelter. What are we going to do? I don't know, but there's 3 or 4 or 5 of us. We're going to figure it out. We're going to get it done, right? And so that's a rite of passage. And there's other ones too. They're like modern day. There's like ropes courses and things you gotta feel your fear. Get to the edge of the cliff or something like that. And that allows a breakthrough. And so I think those types of events are really transformative. And I'll just mention Branson's story, and I'll give it back to you here. Richard Branson writes in his autobiography about the rite of passage, which wasn't official, but his mother was really concerned that he would be a dependent his entire life because she was traveling and wasn't there. So he was about 7 or 8 miles from home in the car with his mom, and the mom said, "Hey, Richard, do you think you can find your way home from here?" And he looks out the window and he's like, "Yeah, I think so." And she's like, "Okay, well, get out and do it, and I'll meet you at the house." And so he got out, age 4, according to Richard, and he went home. And so she drove home, but he found his way home. I think it was a few hours, 9 or 10 hours. And then he said, after that, everything was easy because I knew I could do it. I knew I could depend on myself, rely on myself. And that was at a very young age. So Gatto says, let your kids do dangerous things, ride horses, sail sailboats, these kind of things. Because once they're able to find the center of their strength of a human being, of a soul, of something which is really powerful, then their whole life is going to be like on track for success and they can actually chart their own course and not be worried about having bad grades or bad test scores or somebody labeling you, your attention deficit or all that. Because when a young person accepts those labels, they carry that for the rest of their life when they're 25 and 35 and 50 and they're like, oh, I'm not good at reading. Well, when did they make that decision? Oh, when Mrs. Jones told me in the 8th grade or whatever it was, I tried to read this essay, when I was 8, whatever. It's like, no, we have to unwind that. We have to unlearn that and start anew if we can and begin realizing that, we can create a really cool experience and with awesome people, you can do even greater things.
Yeah. And I think that the education system, we have got a lot of comments, but some that are standing out too of, lack of clarity, that there isn't a lack of clarity in school. We used to teach reading, writing, and math. And then the rest, when it comes to applying education to the real world, should just have that simple foundation, and creativity has been taken out of the school so much. And being able to use the ingeniousness within us all to create something based off of a simple foundation, as opposed to what's happening now is conditioning, and the conditioning is coming in all different types of forms. Not only compulsory education, but again, you're, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 2:30, and then you're going home and you're being conditioned by television, which is a form of education, right? And we're looking at, you were talking earlier about, movie stars or icons or musicians that people are looking up to, and going back to the basics of the conversation on sex education is they're so conditioned now that everything is about sex, which I always laugh and I find humorous. In the psychology world, Freudian was always about everything is sex driven. Obviously, we know there's much more to that, and I'm not a big believer much in a lot of the psychological premises anymore. And when we look at conditioning and Pavlov and Skinner and how we can intentionally manipulate a human when we treat them like an animal and pair and condition certain repertoire into the agenda at hand. And so I think it's huge to say, simply going back to, again, learning how to learn and having clarity, and then taking that into, what do I want to create in the world? What market do I want to be in? Do I want to be in a service industry? Do I want to be in a production industry? Do I want to be an innovator in technology? Do I want to teach? What do I want to do? But it's the lack of ability to feel freedom within, to be able to create and come up with something new and be excited, like you said, and being able to take something away that I can go do something. So the current education system is really producing children that feel helpless. There's a lot of learned helplessness in the conditioning. There's a lot of indoctrinated repertoire to not think, to just ask, tell, do, which is interesting because I was married to a police officer for 14 years, and that's their protocol in the police departments. I, read a lot of the policy manuals and I was around a lot of law enforcement. They think exactly like public school teachers. It's ask, tell, do. I'm going to ask you to do something. You don't do it. I'm going to tell you to do it. You don't do it. I'm going to make you do it. You're going to go to the principal's office, or you're going to have some detention, or you're going to have an extra homework assignment. And so we get into all these notions like you were talking about on conditioning. And so I found it interesting to the topic at hand of sex education is I actually looked up the current curriculum, how it's written in terms of explaining to it. So it says sex education is instruction on issues related to human sexuality, including emotional relations and responsibilities. It has a comma, but I just want to stop it right there. So what they're saying is sex education in our public schools is that they're going to teach our children how to relate emotionally and have responsibilities. I don't know if that belongs in the school, period. I think that defaults back to the parents. And then if the schools are going to do it, if you're in charge of my children, then it needs to be in line with something that is in a freedom and a respect to the human and a respect to the soul and the spirit to embrace itself, and not in a conditioned model of think what I think, and if you don't think what I think, you're in trouble. It goes on to say human sexual anatomy, sexual activity, sexual reproduction, age of consent, reproduction health, reproductive rights, safe sex, birth control, and sexual abstinence. All of those things, some teacher is in charge of teaching our children. I just don't, I personally, now that I'm an adult, I don't agree with it. I didn't even in high school, I started while I was waiting for you to get on. I mean, we all laughed and thought the class was stupid. Like, why do we need this? We know if you have sex with somebody, you get pregnant, don't do it. I mean, leave the biology to biology. You can run, biology of sexual reproduction through a biology class. It doesn't need to be in a specified sex ed. I don't know.
I agree. And I think some of the people who are watching and listening, I think the question, this is maybe we can have a little chat here, because I think the real questions, you mentioned the age of consent, right? Like, when am I allowed to engage in sexual activity as a young man? And at what age should parents talk to their kids? I mean, if we can get the state out of it, get the school out of it, and making it graphic. And could you imagine your daughter, your son learn about, anal sex as a recommended solution to prevent pregnancy? It's like, no, no, let's just talk about pregnancy and what that means, and the consequences of that, and what that's going to do, positive or negative. Human life is great, but, do you want one when you're 11 or 12? You don't, right? But you can do that because your body, your maturity is there, but just the emotional maturity is not there. So, like, age of consent is a pretty hot topic, I think, because that's a real one. Should I be able to engage, or some teenager out there when they're 15 or 16? Well, isn't it their body? If we go back to the principle of self-ownership, which is that I'm from the creator, God or evolution or the Big Bang, or whatever you think, that I own this body, right? This is my arm. This is, my hands and my fingers and my hair. So nobody has the right, the authority to say, you can't do this with your body, as long as I'm not violating their self-ownership. And that's where the consent, and this kind of Me Too movement and stuff. Hey, rape is a bad thing. If, you're trying to engage in sexual activity and somebody says no, then that's done. That is done. So anybody goes beyond that, now they're violating your rights, and you can use force, maybe lethal force, to, stop this person from violating your self-ownership rights of your body. So I think age of consent is really good conversation if you want to consider that, or even like age, when to have the birds and the bees talk like this. Like, I was a teenager, I knew what was going on too, and I'll tell you a story about second grade. But what do you think about age of consent?
So I find age of consent very interesting, especially from constitutional perspectives and historical just perspectives on humans, because reproduction, if we're looking at a few hundred years ago, and the age upon which we were dying, and that frame of reference, reproduction to lifespan, mm-hmm. It was pretty common that as soon as you had your menstrual cycle between the ages of 12 to 14, you were engaged in sex, and in many cultures you were married off already. So I have found that evolutionary mindset perspective on age of consent to be fascinating, because in such a paradigm shift that when I was 14, I do remember having sexual feelings. I had a boyfriend. I waited for religious purposes. We ended up staying together till I was 18. He asked me to marry him. Poor guy. I told him, no, we're still friends. I love you if you were watching. He ended up getting married to somebody else. But I think that it's a fascinating topic on age of consent, because most of my girlfriends, we were all ready essentially to have sex and felt sexual feelings towards the opposite sex by the age of 14. I had a girlfriend who was 14 years old, and she was dating a 20-year-old. And it was like, oh my gosh. And this was the 90s. And I would say the same thing. I'm like, if this was just 200 years ago, they'd be married and she'd already have children. So the fact that I get people have mindsets and we all have our opinion, and I'm not passing judgment one way or another. I just think biologically, when you look at us as the animal kingdom, the age of consent is fairly young. And again, by 13 years old, 13, a lot of these kids are engaging in sex already. And the new thing is, if your safe sex is just oral sex. So not what we were talking about earlier, but that a girl in my daughter's locker room was just caught giving oral sex, and she's in 7th grade. If that were my daughter, I would be absolutely mortified. But that is somebody's daughter, and she's engaging in sex consensually at the age of 13 and enjoying it. She, went on to go public after she got in trouble. So the age of consent I have always found very fascinating. I think 14-year-old boys are already interested in girls, things of self-pleasure is occurring. So I'm not passing judgment. I think I'm being kind of unbiased, or what's the word I'm looking for? But you know what I mean. What do you think about, age of consent?
I will say I was under 18. I was a minor when I lost my virginity, and I saw my buddies being active, getting first and second, third base, in like 6th and 7th grade, and of course our bodies are changing. And I remember being in the 2nd grade. My buddy, sorry to you if this is too explicit, he brought a Penthouse magazine to school in the 2nd grade, and I was just like, wow, like I had no idea what was going on here, and it took me a while. I had an older brother, who's a few years older than me, so I had to, be a little detective and find out what's going on. But I would say at least by 3rd or 4th grade, like, like I could understand conceptually, at that age you're what, 9 years old, you're not a dummy, like your conscious mind, yourself begins to reveal itself, consciously, I would say around, 6 or 7, maybe younger, and to understand, hey, this is the whole experience. Of course, there's a spiritual side, it seems, as well. And that's another great conversation, for kids and pursuing their own, spiritual interests. But yeah, I think age of consent generally seems for me to be just what the young person decides. Of course, it's not like age 3 or something. Mom and dad are a protector or a guardian at some point. But if like you're 14 or something, like who am I to say? Like of course I don't recommend it. I do not suggest that you should. I think you should find someone to be, committed to and make it something really unique and special. But in the meantime, you got to figure out the lay of the land. What's going on here with all these, this plumbing or something. I mean, it's really interesting. So I think there's got to be even a better understanding for parents to kind of heal their wounds with sex education, because I'm not sure my parents got the birds and the bees talk. So how can I expect them to give that to me when they don't even get it? It's like there's no manual for doing this stuff. And you mentioned, being a therapist, so you might be able to, comment on here. But I've taken a tantra yoga course
I'm
and learned
actually
about this stuff.
certified in tantric sex.
Yeah.
It's so funny you bring that up, because we're working on a project where we bring in high-level entrepreneurs and just like-minded folks, and we teach tantric on the island of Hawaii. So it's funny you bring that up. But what were you going to say about tantric?
That's awesome. Well, what I loved about it, and I just did the weekend course, right, just to go, a gentleman by the name of Charles Muir out here in Santa Cruz. But they have other teachers and stuff that are nice. Um, but it was an open conversation, men and women, not dirty, not grimy, not shameful, nothing. Just like, yeah, this is how it works, and this is, do this questions, answers and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, like, I really wish I had had that course at age like 12 or 13 or maybe younger or older, whatever it is. But, to be able to have a forum where we can talk freely, and I'm not going to go to hellfire. I'm not going to be cursed. I'm not going to feel like shame, or, like, if somebody, catches a kid, with his porno mag or videos or stuff. It's like, oh no, like I had a feeling like that. I experienced my parents, found some stash or something. I was like, oh no, I thought it was the end of the world. But what I wish they would have said, and God bless you, I love you, mom and dad, was it's okay. This is normal and natural. Your body's changing. You have emotions. You got feelings. How can, kids learn about it if there's not an atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
of it's okay. Yes, you have questions. Oh, and I don't know the girl situation because I just had a brother. It was just me and my brother. But I think there's, a really important conversation to have. And it's like, okay, so I'm researching and learning so I can have that conversation. Hopefully, I'll have a daughter someday, and be able to open up that connection with a younger person who trusts you. I think that's the other part which schools do so interesting. You might have heard the quote that what you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. So when mom and dad are the most trusting figures for the kids for 6 years, and then they're sending you off to these buildings with people they don't know, adults that they don't know, it's a really scary thing. So that trust gets to get broken, and at some point, in my belief that because many parents don't have an understanding what education is, do your homework, study for that. It's like I was at school for 7 hours today and they want me to do 2 hours of homework. Like, can I go throw the ball around? Can I like go, dance or go wrestle or dig in the dirt? You're just always busy, and that trust begins to be like, despisement, I think, and resentment towards parents, and that trust, like, can I have a conversation? I do have a question about my reproductive organs and life like that. Like, can I ask dad? Can I ask mom? I think, and you mentioned there's single families out there too. So it's like, okay, where do we find time to sit down and just gather ourselves and be like, I got to have a really important conversation with my son or daughter. Like, how do I set this up? So I think it's a process that mom and dad got to consider for themselves at length, and not just think it's just like, some small deal of a, quick research and do it, but it's like, okay, understanding the personality of my son and daughter, their experiences, where they're going to be the next day. I mean, because like in the sixth grade, it was a joke, when I think the girls went in the fourth grade and the sixth grade, and then we went in the sixth grade at school. I went to public school, California, and it was like just joking and laughing, and it wasn't like, that's interesting. It was like giggles and kind of shy, and um, so it's I think such an important topic for parents to consider, and maybe they should do some tantra classes or something and kind of get free from that stigma.
I didn't know you took a course. We could do that. We can have another episode, and we can do a whole episode on tantric.
Yeah, I'm open for it. I'd be more of the student, I think, at that point. But I think it's really cool. I took it a little while ago, but I was intending to go back and learn and see how it all works together. But um, in that particular course that I was taking, they used sexual expression, I believe, to help raise consciousness. And without getting too graphic, maybe we'll save it for the next time. But it was
Yeah,
like,
it's sex ed. I mean that, and wrapping up the radio show because the radio show is going to end really quick. You'll hear him in our ear, since you're on the production studio with me in our headphones. But um, I mean, in some aspects, maybe we do need sex ed because not all parents talk to their children about sex. So how do you balance that? Maybe it should be an optional, an elective, but even if it's an elective, is the student going to fill out the form, or is the parent going to fill out the form? But I know for myself, even when I try to talk to my kids about sex, they're like, So, I mean, there's always two sides to every question and answer. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, you and I are both on the same page that we need reform overall in our schools. I don't see in the near future, because the system is so deep and embedded, that we're going to be able to eliminate compulsory ed in public schools, but I do see a lot of great change and ending on a positive note. When I worked on my doctorate at USC, and the traveling around the world and looking at Finland as the model. I don't know if you read, Finland is getting rid of completely of subjects, and they're going back to the basics. And I think they've been competing for #1 in the world on education, and then their outcomes, because it's all about outcome. How happy and productive are your students at the end of the day that become adults, happy and productive adults? And their models, obviously, we study and need to implement here. So it's getting new models into the situation that we already have. I mean, these schools are built everywhere within the cities. The tax system, you have the California Department of Education here that then filters down into the different districts, into the SELPAs, and all of the different propositions and things that we have is but definitely pushing policies and curriculum to be more individualized, to be more innovative, to be more incongruent, I think, with non-conditioning, not so indoctrinated, like paradigms and protocols that have come over from, obviously we use Germany a lot because of the classical conditioning and the operant conditioning, the one teacher standing at the front and your 30, 40 students just all hail teacher, as opposed to an interactive free flow mindset. But I don't hear the guys on the other end at 7:03, right? Did you hear them
Yeah,
come on?
yeah, and just I would say if there's anybody listening still with the radio show, parents, if your kids are in the public school system, at least have a conversation with them before the sixth grade or the fourth grade or whatever time period it is. Allow that forum to be open so that you can talk about anything that you choose to. And specifically, I would say maybe 7 or 8, like their person is arriving and unfolding, the root of a duco to pull out. They're coming within and they do have these questions. So
Yeah.
have a conversation with them, but yeah, try to, in my view, speak to them before the system gets them, and then love it. Reproduction is a beautiful thing. It's how we all got here, as we all know, but we forget sometimes. That's what brought us here. Our parents made some love, and it was phenomenal and beautiful, and we were the result. We were the result of that. So to teach that same love and appreciation for the biology and for the connection, the spirituality, wherever your values and beliefs are, I think it's going to be super empowering. So parents, you can do it still, even if they're in the public school system.
That was beautiful. That was really well said. That
Thank
was
you.
awesome. I think the producers are gone. I heard them leave, and it's 7:04. They're supposed to, at least I think, cue me to say goodbye. But bye, Armed Radio.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. So we can wrap up here on Facebook, and I'd love to chat with you just a little bit off on the end to finish it up. We had a lot of great interaction with our Facebook Live too. Lots of comments if you want to look back through there, and I'll go through and answer some of the questions that when they scroll through. But in summary, on my end, I think should we have sex education in our schools? I do think we should. I just think it needs to be improved, like the model that we currently have. I think it should be optional. I don't think it should be mandatory. That's my own personal opinion on it. So I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I respect your opinion. You're a human being. You have definitely all the rights of every human being to have their opinion. I think school should be voluntary. All classes should be voluntary. And I think if they made sex ed voluntary in a clean way, I think they have a lot of interest, or it's brought some tantra in for teens, or I don't know if they want to do that. But yeah, definitely, mom and dad, whoever it is, it's up to you guys. And you guys know your kids the best. You have the best interest. You have actually a lifetime of interest, of love, and care and comfort. So you'll make the best decision. I think you will. And if not, well, there's other people to assist you and help explain it. It is a little bit uncomfortable. And as we get more comfortable with ourselves, I think we can explain the facts of life to our kids and nephews or whoever else is around us with love and with wisdom.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on my show. I really appreciate you.
Yes, glad to
Okay.
be here. Let's do it again.
Awesome. Peace
All right,
out.
see you, everyone.